The following podcast is an Embassy Row production.
Hey everybody, I'm Marc Lamont Hill, owner of Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books. I am a professor, a scholar, and most importantly, a book nerd. I say book nerd because I don't just love to read books, I'm the guy who loves to read about the book. I love hearing authors talk about how and why they wrote the book, and I love talking to other book nerds about their favorite books. That's why I started Coffee and Books. It's a podcast all about books. Every episode, I sit down over a cup of coffee with the world's biggest authors to discuss the most interesting, controversial, fun, and important books. And sometimes I'll hang out with experts, fans, and other guests to talk about some of the greatest books of all time. And today, I am so excited to be joined by Michele Harper. She is the author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Beauty in Breaking, a memoir. So good to see you, Michele.
Thank you. Nice to join you here today.
Okay, first of all, you wrote a memoir that hit the New York Times list. Did you expect that?
I know nothing about this path, so I just figured out as I go along. It was surreal. It still is. It's still sinking in, and that's it. I mean, I'm amazingly appreciative and grateful, and it's super exciting.
Wow. You know, actually, when we start the show, I always start with a cup of coffee. Today, in honor of your profession, I am drinking a red eye. For those out there that don't know, that is a full cup of coffee with a shot of espresso. It is for people who need to stay awake during extraordinary moments of fatigue. Are you a coffee drinker?
I'm a coffee drinker. I love coffee. I finish my coffee. For me, it's a ritual every morning. I prefer a dark roast. I like the chocolatey notes, smoky flavors. And I will grind my beans fresh every morning and hand pour it.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. I'm serious.
This show is for book nerds. You have moved into coffee nerd area now. This is impressive. And as an emergency room physician, is coffee enough? Or you're not at a point where you're like, you need to throw some extra espresso in there or?
Just the coffee. I have to keep it simple. No, I mean, I had cream and sugar. I know it's cheating a little bit, but I keep it simple and I love the flavor, and I try not to buy coffee when I bring my supplies with me. So I have my special cup dedicated for coffee.
Wow. So you're clearly multi-talented. You are a coffee maker. In the book, you talk about making all kinds of rustic soups.
Yeah.
And of course, you have this side job as an emergency room physician, which is kind of a neat job. Now, what would make somebody with all this stuff going on decide also to write a memoir, particularly at this stage in your life?
Because I feel that my mission to heal, to be of service, to be a support system for healing of others, that's what I resonate more with any other title. So yes, as an ER doctor, I can help one person at a time, one family at a time, potentially one community at a time. But then in writing, many more people across the country and world. So it was in service of that mission.
Wow. You had a story inside of you, clearly, several. And I think what I enjoy about this book is your ability to weave all of those things together. There's an analysis of the system. There is a recounting of your own experiences within that system as a Black woman. And then there's this whole other part that you are vulnerable about, your whole experience growing up, your experiences as an adult, and how they kind of commingle with how you navigate your professional world. I mean, that's a heck of a thing to mix.
Right. And aren't they all interconnected? Anyway, I mean, I feel like from when I was young, growing up in an abusive household with a father who was a batterer, that I was groomed for emergency medicine because I just had a snapshot of situations and had to decide, okay, is this immediately life-threatening? Is it likely to blow over this time while maintaining vigilance? That's how it was. And I speak about an instance, could have been any day, when there was violence in my home and my brother restrained my father in an effort to protect all of us and mother specifically from him. And my father bit his finger and it was a bad bite. And I remember thinking, what a brutal act. Like if he can do this against a family member, anything could happen at any time and we're not safe. And it was moments like that where I realized that it was important for me to stay safe, do what I can to protect my family. And then thinking about ways that how I could emerge from there and help other people. And when I went to an ER on an occasion with my brother when he was needing medical care, I saw all manner of life converge in this space. Whether there's a little girl who needed attention for a cut, or a patient in cardiac arrest being wheeled in and attended to by EMS doing chest compressions and putting a breathing tube down. Whatever it was, all these people converge here looking for their own healing. And there was hope there. And that was one of my experiences that gave me hope too, that there's another side to this. There's a way out where I can do something.
Wow. It's like the Greek Chiron, the wounded healer.
Yes.
The idea of going through life committed to the practice of healing others while you have, as he had, this sort of gaping wound, right? And we all have gaping wounds. It's not particular to you. That we're all trying to kind of heal that part of ourselves while we're healing the world. But you literally go out and make a commitment to healing the world. And you knew quite early you wanted to do this. That emergency room scene with your brother's one thing. But in high school, I mean, you're like young doctors of, I mean, like you're starting clubs.
Yeah. Yeah, I did decide early. I know, of course, then you go out in life and you weigh your options. But yes, I decided early that that's what I wanted to do.
And then you go to Harvard. And in the book, you were pretty intentional about not talking about Harvard.
Right.
Which is really weird because people who go to Harvard, that's usually the only thing they want to talk about.
Right.
Why? Why?
So strange.
What made you make that choice?
Well, when I do bring it up, I mention that institutions of higher learning with a lot of privilege can often be problematic. I mean, we talk about structural violence, we talk about elitism and institutionalized racism and misogyny, the list goes on. That is very prominent in those institutions. They deserve the scrutiny that they've gotten of late. And I didn't want to dwell on it because you're right. A lot of people do cling to this privilege. They feel like it makes them special. I don't feel like that's how life's work, and it shouldn't work that way. And I think that helps to perpetuate the elitism. I focused on other issues that I think are important. I focused on trying to amplify the voices of people who are traditionally silenced. I think that is our way forward as a society.
Talk to me about some of those issues that you raise in the book, some of those voices who are often silenced.
An experience that stayed with me, and it's happened on numerous occasions. For example, Dominique, a Black man who was brought in police custody under arrest. And the police had said, okay, you swallowed drugs. You all have to do your thing, prove it, examine him, get them out. I heard a big commotion when he was being registered. I was the only Black doctor in that section of the emergency department, and I was the doctor in charge. Clearly, this was not being resolved well. The patient did not want to be examined. He was competent. He was fine. He was sober. And the nurses and my trainee, my resident, were trying to force this exam on him. So I intervened. It didn't happen. I did discharge him because that is his right. And the disturbing thing to me about that interaction, well, many things, was first that the police brought him in wanting to compel us to do an illegal exam, and it was considered commonplace. And then that the staff had told me that when the police do this, they just go along with it. The prisoner doesn't have any say. They do whatever it takes, whether it's physical restraint, chemical restraint, to force this exam on the patient. And then that my trainee felt that I shouldn't have the authority, even though I was in charge, to make this decision, and called what she felt was a higher authority, hospital ethics, hospital legal. Now, hospital legal told her, well, indeed, I am right, and it would be illegal to do that.
In that moment, it felt like the higher authority she was summoning in a way was whiteness. It was,
Yes.
It was
Yes.
like, just for the audience who hasn't had a chance to read the book yet, there's this moment where Lauren comes in the room before you. And I love the fact that you're just sitting at your desk, like, I just need another 2 minutes. Just let me, and you're like listening to the commotion. Lauren says, and this is, again, you're the attending physician. Lauren is training under you. She says, sir, you are going to have to do what we say. You did something that is dangerous and life-threatening. Now you are under arrest. You must get in this gown, and then we will examine you. You said no invitation, no question, simply her interpretation of the events and a directive to comply. Is Lauren the normal physician? In other words, 9 times out of 10, when the police come in with someone who's under arrest or in custody, they don't get you, they get Lauren. Is that fair to say?
That was a teaching institution, so there were a lot of residents. I work in the community now, and there aren't.
I mean,
So it
that
depends.
mentality, though.
And again, it depends, but I see it frequently, because this structural racism, we talk about the police a lot, and we should. And we have issues in medicine as well. And we are often complicit unless we make a different decision. We have to start making different decisions.
How does that happen? How does a doctor whose primary job is to heal, to offer care, find themselves bound up in a situation where they're encouraging people in custody to kind of forego their own civil liberties, their own rights, and to go along with police pressure? I mean, there's no class in medical school about that. How does that happen?
No, but it has to do with who the provider is, always, right? Because Lauren, this happened before the time of, Karen's. I probably should have named her Karen, but Lauren identified with whiteness and male privilege and these institutions. So in her mind, she was doing the right thing because neither the patient nor myself had personal sovereignty or autonomy. This is what was taken for granted in that moment. This is what is often taken for granted in medicine. That's why it was so important for me to not only intervene in the moment, but to tell the story. We have to talk about this and then act.
Hmm. When you entered the room that day, you were intentional about grabbing your white coat.
Yeah.
I had never thought about how annoying it must be to wear a white coat in a hospital, of all places. It's like the nastiest place on earth. But part of why you wear a white coat is because it signals that you're in charge. As a Black woman doctor, talk about what it means to even have to kind of signify who and what you are. Because no one takes for granted that you're the doctor. No one ever you don't walk in a room and people go, oh, she must be the doctor.
Right. They don't. And even after I introduce myself as the doctor, they ask to see the doctor. We'll have a whole conversation. And then they say, so when's the doctor coming? I know. It happens all the time. So yes, I was intentional. I started writing the book 5 years ago. That's my estimate, but thereabouts. It is so annoying and difficult to wear. And now there's COVID. I don't even bring my white coat to the ER anymore. It is what it is. People are going to have to take my word for it. And there's only so much difference it makes in the first place. It's a chronic, ongoing issue, unfortunately. And until we have more diversity and representation in medicine, it's not really going to change.
When you're in medical school, can you talk a little bit about how you would kind of experience this?
Well, in medical school, I found some support in colleagues, but it's constantly proving yourself, proving that you're worthy of being there, asserting your right to be there, not looking for acknowledgement or validation from others, and just a lot of resilience constantly. I mean, it starts before medical school, continues in medical school, and then after as an attending. I'm often asked by medical students, Black women, women of color, men of color who want to go into medicine, what's your advice? What should I do? And I tell them that this resilience is going to have to come from within, and there's constant struggles that will be faced. And also that love of this field is not going to be enough because of the challenges and the struggle. But what's going to keep you there and keep you grounded and sane is a mission and a calling.
You, in a way that I hadn't quite seen before, had a clear recognition of your calling, and it seemed to be the most important thing in your life, even at moments where some people choose otherwise. I'm thinking specifically about the moment where you're leaving residency and you're headed to this awesome new job and you're divorced. Can you talk a little bit about what played into that in both your career and the other factors?
Yeah, well, in that relationship, he had said that I was doing well on my career. Now, we met at this will give a sense of my age. We met at freshman year in college at the ice cream mixer. That's what it was called. That's really what it was called. It's a really cute story. That's where we met. And so we had a long relationship and essentially grew up together as adults. We had our plans. He was interested. He did anthropology. He was interested in film. And I was on this science medical path. So we were together and at that point married towards the end of my residency. And he had said, well, you're on your path and you're going to do well on your path. You're meeting all the milestones and goals. But he felt that he wasn't, and it was going to be harder. And so he didn't feel comfortable being with me. He was having a lot of insecurities and life crisis. So that's how it ended. I continued on because I had signed a contract, and I felt like if I signed a contract, I'm a woman of my word, so I'm going to go anyway. So that's what happened. I tell that story, I mean, not only because it was true and it was life altering, but just to show some of the challenges we can go through personally. And then at that point, I had a choice. Was I going to go forward? I'm a firm believer that you deal with what happens and pick up the pieces later. So I knew it was going to be traumatic personally, and I knew that I would just have to deal with it.
In the book, you say, I beg the universe to make our breakup feel fair or right and to let me survive. That was one of the lines that stuck with me. One, you trying to make it make sense, but also the kind of hope you had that you'd be okay. I mean, the hope that you'd survive it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're at the culmination of your professional training. You've done all you have to do. You're free, right? I mean, no more residency, no more medical school. You are now a doctor, and you can afford nice stuff, great windows, all the stuff you wanted. And the rug gets pulled out from under you.
It did. It was so painful. And it was one of those times when I say, how I beg to understand and beg to survive. But I knew it was one of those situations where I just had to feel it and get through it. There was no stopping it. There was no stopping the pain. I couldn't even fathom at the time how painful it would be, but I knew it was going to just rock me to my core. And I had to let that happen. And then it was even a deeper hurt than just about him. On some level, I knew that our relationship would run its course. Plus, somebody doesn't want to be with me. I really let him go, whatever.
Right. I like you like me. Right.
Exactly. I don't take prisoners, like whatever. But it did trigger a deeper sense of abandonment and loss. And I recognized, like from my childhood, that was a wound that was opened again from that. So I did recognize also that that was my opportunity. I mean, the divorce was a blessing in that respect. It was my opportunity to heal an area I didn't realize I hadn't fully healed.
Yeah.
So began the work again.
Let's talk about abandonment, because that's a theme that comes in the book many times and shows up in different ways. And every place it shows up is different, but compelling, if not more. Your father, you begin the book, as you mentioned, by talking about this scene of domestic violence. And you talked about your childhood as a war zone in the book. Talk to me a little bit about how things were and how that war zone, as you call it, shaped who you are as a person in some of these feelings of abandonment that guided you or pushed you throughout your life.
I mean, I know it built a resilience and a sensitivity to the pain people might feel. I mean, it wasn't a childhood that I would have chosen. It was the hand that I was dealt, and I had to make a decision what I would do with it. And, I think about situations I've been in with patients, like the young couple in their 30s who had worked so hard to get pregnant and had a great relationship with their obstetrician. And we get a notification there was a newborn coming in unresponsive. The minute we see this baby, we know the baby has died. We worked on the baby for far longer than would be indicated because it's a baby who was perfect and someone's hopes and dreams and was gone. And I had to deliver the news to this couple, and they were devastated. And it was a situation where there was no way to make that feel right or fair.
Yeah.
It was just a tremendous loss. And I haven't lost a newborn, but I could tap into what it's like to lose dreams and hopes and there's no way you could have planned for it. You didn't ask for it, but that's where we are. And so I had to hold a space for their healing. And somehow as humans, I hope we have to do that for each other, and then we have to move forward.
I'm going to return to your father in a moment, just
Yeah.
to connect the dots for folk. But honestly, the moment that brought me to tears in your book was when you were talking about this baby. As you said, this baby comes into the ER and you're a doctor and you know this poor child is gone before you even lay eyes on him. But like you said, you're doing all the things you're supposed to do, giving him, as you said, enough drugs to start a car. And you said, I looked down at this little boy's face for the first time, dark eyes, that were wide open, beautiful brown skin with a bluish cast. If this child had still been alive, he would have borne a strong resemblance to my sister's infant son, Eli. He was the specter of the child I didn't have, the ghost of what might have been. His beauty welled up in my eyes, and I had to blink myself back to reality. This was little Angel Doe. At first glance, it was impossible to tell if his eyes were black or merely dark from the pupils being fixed and dilated. In either case, there was nothing behind them. His little purple pouty lips were half parted where he'd exhaled goodbye long ago. His face was still encircled by the white of the baby blanket that crowned his head. There was no baby here, just a blanket around the body of a departed cherub. Woo! Woo!
Yeah.
Woo! It brought me into so many places. It made me, of course, think of when W.E.B. Du Bois was describing the loss of his own son, Burghardt, in Souls of Black Folk. It resonated with so many stories I've heard of mothers who have lost their children. But in this case, you're the doctor attempting to offer care to this beautiful child who is gone. And the child's in your arms. And you have to tell the family, you have to tell this mother and grandmother and father that their baby is gone. So you, as a doctor, aren't just dealing with your own loss. You have to kind of deal with sort of the loss of human life. And then you have to help other people navigate their own experiences with loss. What does that do to you? What does that do to your soul? What does that do to your spirit?
So on one hand, it can be depleting, but I have to say that it's also, for me, restorative and rejuvenating to be in service of others in that way. I find tremendously rewarding. So yes, there's this element of needing to take care of myself. For me, it's helpful to do the physical practice of yoga, meditation. So I do the work to take care of myself. Like if I work with a coach, in the past, I've done therapy. But I will also say, to be in the service of others in this way, I don't know another way to be in this world. And if I didn't do that, there wouldn't be a point.
It's a heck of a thing to navigate. But after you navigated that moment, you went home, you had your wine.
Yes.
Nice little wine Benadryl cocktail.
Yeah. Sometimes it comes to that.
Hey, I wrote that one down. Like, I might need that one night at 1 in the morning. That might be helpful for me. But you cried.
Yeah.
You cried. And for me, that was a turning point in the book because you cried. And we all cry, but you don't cry that much. And at that moment, you hadn't cried before. Talk to me about that.
Right. No, for a long time in my history, when I was young, it was about surviving. And people have this, people in trauma, this fight or flight mode. All your energy just goes to surviving. I've seen it with kids I've taken care of, also from traumatic backgrounds, like this beautiful 5-year-old. And he had an injury and we were putting an IV in. He didn't flinch, which was so concerning to me. Like if we did anything painful to him, he didn't move at all. I know. And that's often how it is with kids who've been traumatized. They don't. They're just trying to survive, and it's not till later. It's tremendously protective at that time, until it's not. And then we do have to feel and heal. And so that was a point in my life when I started to process in a deeper way. And so I did cry. And so, of course, that case, helping this family who lost their newborn, wasn't about me. The byproduct gift to me was that I healed.
You have a very mature take on life. You said at one point, living through such changes was difficult. Now I see those junctures when everything I had counted on came to an abrupt end as a privilege. They gave me the opportunity to be uncertain, and in that uncertainty grew opportunity. And you talked a little bit about the Japanese art of kintsukuroi.
Yes.
What's kintsukuroi? I thought it was such a beautiful sort of, not just practice, but metaphor for how we can think about life.
So the art where broken pottery is restored by taking an amalgam of precious metals, platinum, yellow gold, take your pick, and it's repaired using that. So the cracks are highlighted, and it's thought to be even more beautiful after the mending. We don't pretend like it didn't happen. We know it happened, and
Mm.
this is the result. And I feel the same way about human beings, that, this is part of the deal of life, is that difficult things will happen. And these difficult things, I mean, at some point in life, are going to break us. So then the next question is, well, what will be our next step? And that's a choice.
Mm.
And I feel that the healing, the mending, we can emerge more beautiful.
Part of how you confronted your own healing was to come to terms with loss, in ways that, in my estimation, require such a level of emotional maturity that most of us don't get there. You lost your father. He didn't die,
Right.
but you made a decision that he wouldn't be in your life anymore. And I don't mean to keep reading so much from your book, but like, I was so moved by certain parts of it. And again, the weaving of all these things together was compelling, but it also honestly offered so many life lessons for me. You said, I had decided not to invite Morris to the marriage celebration. In fact, he didn't even know about it. Not long after, he let me know that he no longer wanted to be a part of my life. This was during one of the many phone conversations he coerced from me, asserting some type of genetic imperative to maintain a connection to one's family. When that failed, he tried to control me with threats to withdraw financial support. When that failed, I decided that accepting his money came at far too high a cost. The coercion stopped. As far as I was concerned, the title of father had to be earned, and I began to define family for myself, concluding that inclusion in this group could be forfeited. I cut these cords to support myself. I knew by then that it was only from that space that I could make my own assessments. It was only then that I could finally confront him about his abusive behavior. I told him that he had been a terrorist in our family, that he had so profoundly ruined some of its members' lives that they struggled with substance abuse, that my mother still flinched at loud noises. I told him that if he ever wanted to communicate with me again, he would first have to acknowledge the truth of who he was. Instead of admitting that any of what I'd said had even occurred, he vanished. He made his choice. It is better to be left with a ghost than a ghoul. So his disappearance from my life was an acceptable outcome. I'm sorry. If we were in church, I'd be running around, right? I'd be running around in a circle right now. You said it is better to be left with a ghost than a ghoul. So his disappearance from my life was an acceptable outcome. Woo! That's hot fire right there. Talk to me about what it means to come to that conclusion that it's better to have a ghost than a ghoul.
And I look at that as a gift. It was a revelation that has served me well, because I am a firm believer in healthy relationships. So I believe, because I'm committed to that, because I'm committed to healing and wellness, that's my path. I believe redemption is possible. I believe people can change and grow and evolve if they want to. So if they do, if we're able to be in relation in a non-toxic way, then sure, our paths can converge and that person can be in my life. But if it's not possible, then they should not be in my life. And that doesn't matter what their name is, what their title is. That's just how it is. So in my commitment to that path, it's not personal in that way. I don't say it with any anger or resentment. I wish everyone the best. And I feel the kindest thing is to maintain commitment to that, because if I really love someone, then I will not enable them being abusive to me. If I really love them, I won't engage in that way with them, and I will release them.
Has your father ever come back around to say, hey, I got this one wrong?
He did. I mentioned he contacted me. It was maybe roughly 10 years after that path. And he wanted to have a conversation and he wanted to apologize. And he mentioned how I had said to him in that conversation, you never own anything. You don't own what you do in this life. And he had mentioned over 10 years later that that phrase stuck with him and just echoed in his mind. So he had to look at his behaviors and his life, and he had a lot of regrets and apologized. So yes, I've heard from him. I mean, it's
I meant since the book came out. Has it been like a deeper level of?
No, it's kind of the same. No, it's kind of so. People grow at different rates. It's similar, but also with this book, it's always tricky when you talk about family and family issues, and there can be backlash, and it can trigger people's own pain. So it's been interesting because certain people, him included, once they realized that, like, they knew about the book. I told people about the book. But once they realized, wait a second, this book is actually going to come out and people are going to read it, it's been very difficult for some people to come to terms with that. So I haven't, since the book has been released, I haven't heard from him. I am sure he's going through his own process. I've heard from family members.
Do you think he's read it?
I think he's at least reading it because he did text me. He ordered it.
Got you. Well, and look, you don't take too long to get to his part, so it's not, it ain't like you got to get to chapter 10 to know. Like you read it through chapter 1, okay, he's trash. You know, that, as a reader, that's kind of that's like the initial thing. So I don't know if he read the whole thing, but he didn't have to get far to see how you see things. Let's talk a little bit about process and memoir writing in particular, because when you write a memoir, you're telling your story, but you're also narrating the lives and experiences of others. And in the hospital, you give people fake names. You make up different names for the hospital. You got different names for patients. And so the guy in the hospital that punches you, you know, from South Philly, he don't know he in the book. You know, he probably remember that night, given what you described. But when you write about mom and dad and sister and brother and ex-husband, and even some weirdos on dating apps, they know they in there.
Yes.
How do you go about, at the beginning, preparing yourself for that? And did you prepare them for the kind of stories you were going to tell?
So I will say the people close to me, like my mom, I told her, XYZ, this is what I'm going to talk about, just so you know. People close to me, yes, I prepared them in advance. I didn't go into detail because that's my process to keep everything private till it's done, but I prepared them. And then for myself, I went through a process where I really meditated on what I was going to include. It was important for me to tell my story when it comes to my personal life. But I have a lot of respect for the fact that the other people I'm discussing, they don't have a say. And so I really tried to only include as much about them that was relevant and important, because I didn't want it to be a case where I'm just gossiping about people or I'm exacting some kind of revenge. So I examined at every point in time, I examined my intention. And I felt that, okay, if my intentions were honorable and I did a gut check on it, then it was okay and I would move forward. And I did recognize there could be backlash. You know, I'll never forget, towards the end of the editing process, I went to this talk at Penn and they had journalists. And they were talking about the difficulties of being a female journalist and being from the Middle East. And there was a Syrian journalist who was speaking. And in her culture, it's frowned down upon. So, I mean, it's a literal life threat for her to do this work. And I spoke to her afterwards and told her about this memoir and asked her if she had any advice for me. And she told me that in her work, she's lost pretty much all of her family. They don't want to associate with her at all because she's committed to truth telling. She lost all of her friends. So she said to me, if you care about this work, if it's meaningful, you just have to be ready to lose everyone if that's what it takes. And then you just start over. No, I didn't lose everyone. She pays a much higher sacrifice. Yeah.
You have to be prepared to lose everyone and start over. I know you said you didn't lose everyone, but were you prepared to?
Yes.
Honestly.
Yes. I asked myself, how important is this work? And what risk are you willing to take? And I was on her team with that. And so I was ready for that.
What relationships did you think were the most vulnerable to loss?
My mother and my sister. And it's pretty much true. So I'm going to be careful with, okay, I'll put it this way. Only because I still want to be careful with not telling too much of other people's story. But this book can be particularly triggering for people who have undigested trauma. And that is what it's done.
One of my favorite books of all time is a book by Bell Hooks called Remembered Rapture. And it's a book where she reflects on what it means to be a writer, particularly a Black woman writer. And there's all sorts of insights in it for me. I could read it a million times. But one of the things she talks about was the relationship between memoir and memory and how that plays out, not just in your life, but in the lives of the people you write about. You know, For example, she said she'd write about her childhood and she'd write about abuse or trauma. And then you have not just people who are embarrassed or ashamed by it, but people who say that didn't happen. People would say you're misremembering your childhood. We didn't go there. That what didn't happen. And as your mom laid on that bathroom floor and you sort of talked about how her biggest priority in that moment was finding the backs of her earrings for whatever reason.
Right.
Which I thought was just a beautiful narration of the event and heartbreaking. I found myself wondering, I wonder how her mother experienced that. I wonder if she would narrate that the same way and how she might tell a different story. Not just about what happened, but about why it happened and how she experienced it.
Right.
How did you navigate that? Were there moments where you said, I know this is my story, but mama was there too? Or is there a moment where mama says, yeah, that kind of happened, but not like that?
Now, luckily, so far, I haven't gotten, it didn't happen like that so much. But I have gotten, why didn't you talk about, like, for example, from mom, when we would go to the mall every Sunday with your grandmother, and why couldn't you make it a little softer and sugar coated? Couldn't you have made me just sound better? I mean, I've gotten feedback like that because people are scared and there's such a commitment to denial and what people are ready to face. So yeah, that keeps coming up. It reminds me, I know this is only tangential, but when we talk about memory and experience, and some of it, certainly memory is fraught. And then there's the question of what we want to remember and how invested we are in exploring it. I had a patient who came in, a 16-year-old, thereabouts, not exactly, but teenager who was brought in by her mother, and she was depressed. Really depressed. Now, I spoke to her alone because I tend to do that. Probably sensitivity from my childhood and wanting to just make sure I screen for abuse and make sure people are okay. And she told me it all started when her aunt abused her sexually when she was young. She's not around this aunt anymore. She lives somewhere else. And she told me she had disclosed this to her mother, and her mother said it didn't happen and made it clear to her she never wanted to hear about it again. And it was years prior, but ever since then, like, this was a turning point in her life, and she's been depressed ever since, just cycles of depression. And I asked the girl, I said, do I have permission to speak with your mother about it? I mean, certain things I have to talk to parents about and child protective services, etc. But I asked permission first, just to respect autonomy. And she said, please, can you please bring her in? Can you please tell her? Because maybe she'll believe it if it comes from a doctor. So yeah, just getting it, just components that go into memory and what we're willing to deal with.
Who are you as a writer? Are you a writer? Do you identify as a writer? Do you say, now I'm a writer, I'm a doctor/writer?
I'm going to claim that. Yeah, I claim it now. And I'm sorting that out right now. I mean, now there's a whirlwind of interviews and this book. I have another essay coming out soon, and I want to do more projects. So I'm still on the path of figuring out who I am as a writer. But I know that I want to continue to write. I know there's more on this path for me. It's really rewarding, so I want to continue. You
were a science person. You wanted to be a doctor early. I know you said you threw around other ideas, architect, engineer, whatever, but none of that says, like, I'm going to write a New York Times best-selling memoir. Did you have a writerly identity as a kid? When did you know that you had the ability to write and write compellingly? There were seeds of it there when I was young. I would journal. I would write poetry. But then when I went to college, I really just focused on the sciences. Of course, I was a psychology major. I mean, of course. But for the most part, just sciences. I feel I've always had the soul and heart of an artist. I typically don't spend free time with people in medicine. Like, I spend free time with artists. I love, like, my temples are museums of contemporary art. So I don't think it's surprising in that way. But did I know I would write a book and then I'd want to write more? Not specifically, but I knew somehow there'd be a connection to art. There had to be, because it's the air I breathe. The other thing that I noticed is the craft of your writing. You paid attention to craft. What was your journey toward that, right? I mean, was this like a thing where you took classes? Or have you always been an expressive writer? Like, it's one thing to write a book. It's another thing to put care into craft in such a way that it feels like art. I mean, yes, I went to school, and I think I got a good education in school. They
But
do pretty well over there in Cambridge.
but I mean, in general, oh, you know what's funny? I was actually referring to National Cathedral School, like 4th grade through 12th grade, when I said the good education.
Yes. Okay, fair.
But I consider myself, in terms of writing, apart from that, kind of self-taught. I wanted to take classes, but my schedule didn't allow for it. My shift work in emergency medicine, but I wanted to write, and these stories were there. So I hired an editor, and I said, well, if I'm going to work on my writing, I had this book idea. I might as well write my book. So I would chapter by chapter, and she would, terrible at grammar, she would like tell me grammar, say, explore this point, explore that point, or do you need this point? So that's kind of how it went. But I didn't get to take the classes I wanted, and I feel like I largely just channeled this book and figured it out as I went along.
Was it painful to write?
The editing was painful, but the writing, I loved the writing. I mean, it felt like a spiritual process for me, a meditation. It was hard to coordinate it with my schedule and find the time, but the writing itself, I really enjoy.
Were there moments where you felt re-traumatized?
There were moments that were really hard to write. And, for example, when I was speaking about the end of my marriage, I literally played the Whitney Houston song.
I Will Always Love You.
I Will Always Love You. I played it. I had to stop writing. I played it. I burned a candle, like vanilla candle, and just wept. Like I felt like I was over it, but I experienced it again. And it was a clearing process.
Right.
So it didn't feel re-traumatizing, but it was like a excavation of whatever residual pain. And then after writing it, then I was good. Like I'm good.
Like you left it all on the page.
Exactly. So yes, there was re-experiencing the breakup of the more current relationship. Like that was closer in time. I had to stop. I had to walk. I had to take off like 2 weeks of writing. So yes, it became a process in and of itself. I didn't anticipate it. I didn't anticipate that even in writing this book, I would experience increased levels of healing, but I did. Writing is fantastic.
Yes, y'all hear that out there? Writing is fantastic. It's also incredibly painful. I've been working on a memoir. It's a very specific memoir about my journey as a writer and reader. I've been writing it for 10 years, and I've written maybe 4 books since then, but I can't finish it because I'm not ready to confront some of the chapters, some of the issues. And quite frankly, I'm waiting for some folk to die so that I can feel kind of safe to share it all. And so when I watch the bravery with which you approach the journey, and that you can see it as a practice of healing, it's like your own kind of therapeutic practice.
Right.
That's admirable, but I want people out there to know that it's also very challenging and very painful. And it's one of the many reasons why people wait until they're much older to write a memoir. Were there people who told you, you're too young to write a memoir?
They didn't. Now, maybe because, but on your prior point, I will say that some of the edit, and I had to add more personal details once it was sold and I was under contract. The deadline was helpful. I mean, because I'm going to tell you, parts of it were really hard to write. And what kept me on deadline, even if I had to step away for 2 weeks, was the fact that I have to answer to the publisher. So I hear you with it being painful, having to step away. And if not for that deadline, I do think it would have taken a lot longer. But in terms of the memoir, well, we could do the math on this, but I'm older than I look. So there's that. And then...
No, but some people want that to be like your retirement work. Like, write the last book, write about the hospital, write about racism. And then when you like 70, write about, the retrospective.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, because it wasn't an autobiography. Like I didn't say, this is what I went through in my life and here I am. It's a memoir. So it's exploring certain themes in my life, part of my journey. So in that way, it felt okay. I would never write an autobiography at my age. I don't feel that's appropriate. But this felt like the right thing to do.
And I think that's an important distinction out there for those of you fellow book nerds that may not know this. An autobiography is kind of the story of your entire life. A memoir captures a particular period in a writer's life. So you can write a memoir of your experiences in high school, or a memoir of your time in the military, or of a memoir of whatever. And I think that sometimes, because of how we've been taught to think about memoir and autobiography or any kind of self-narration, it can be seen as an act of self-indulgence. It can be seen as an expression of the ego. It's like, there's so much stuff going on in the world. Why are you writing about yourself? And I think for Black people, there's a long tradition of us having to narrate our own experiences because the world just doesn't tell our story otherwise. But there are so many Black women writers for whom I wish we had more memoirs. You know, I wish we had a memoir from Zora. I wish we had a memoir of Toni K. Bambara. And because so many have died so young,
Right.
you know, we don't get to know B.B. Moore Campbell's full story. We don't get, you know what I mean? We don't get Octavia Butler's full self kind of narration. And those are beautiful things. So when I see like Bell Hooks with like 15 books of memoir,
Right.
I'm like, thank you. When I read yours, I'm like, thank you. This is a major intervention into the story. Before you go, what do you read?
So I tend to read nonfiction. I have so much respect for fiction writers, but I personally enjoy nonfiction. Maybe it's like the science in me. So I recently read Harriet Washington's, it's right here, A Terrible Thing to Waste.
Yes.
I love Audre Lorde. I love James Baldwin, Roxane Gay, Rebecca Solnit. So usually nonfiction, social commentary. That's what I enjoy.
So then you will love and hate the most pleasurable part of the show for me. It's a game I like to play with the guests.
Oh gosh.
I mean, it's not that bad.
If there's any trivia, like I'm terrible at all of that.
It's not trivia. It's not trivia at
Okay.
all. I would never do trivia because that's an unfair expectation.
Okay.
This is called Buy It, Borrow It, or Burn It.
Okay.
I'm going to give you 3 books. One you have to buy, one you can borrow, the other you burn. The first book, Harriet Washington, but not the book you just mentioned. Rather, Medical Apartheid.
Yes.
Harriet Washington, Medical Apartheid. The second book, Roxane Gay, Bad Feminist. And the third book, I have 2 third books. One is like a gift. And should I be nice or should I be nice or should I be nice or mean?
Nice. and mean, whatever. Yeah,
okay, whatever's favorable to you. All right.
Yes.
The third book will be Ben Carson's Gifted Hands.
Oh, come on. That one burned. That's so easy. Light it up. Light it up. Okay. So that one's gone.
Wait, when that book came out as a young Black person wanting to be a doctor, how important was that book? And you're from like the DC area. I mean, like it didn't resonate with you.
I know, but the thing is, I can't go back in time. I can't not see who he is. I can't. And the larger context of his work and what he's become and what he's standing for is just so disturbing. So yes, I respect it, but right now you have given me 2 amazing options and then you have put him into the mix. So
I feel like I made this too easy for you.
Yes, we're gonna have to light that one for the cause.
Okay, I was going to throw Baldwin as a third one, but then that would have been see that was the mean part of me. But you said be nice, so I gave you Carson. So we're burning Carson, despite
we're burning that. We got protests going on. We need to like light the path.
So which one are we buying? One are we buying?
I'm gonna say Medical Apartheid. First of all, I have both of those other books.
Yes.
But for the purposes of this game, I'm going to say Medical Apartheid because that's so important for me and my work, and I reference it all the time.
You reference it in the book, in fact. It's why I chose it.
Yeah, I love it. And then Roxane Gay, Bad Feminist. I'll say borrow. Again, I have that book too, and I have a number of books like that, which is why I could say I could borrow that. But Harriet Washington has to be part of the permanent collection because there are fewer books like it.
Right, and Medical Apartheid really brilliantly lays out the kind of stratification, the kind of racial and disparities that we see,
yes,
and how that plays out along race and class lines, but particularly along race lines, yeah.
And how it's always been part of the foundation of medicine,
right?
Which is why, in order to address it, we're really going to have to dismantle these systems. Which is why people like Lauren exist. They always have existed. It's our history.
Yeah, right. And then of course, Roxane Gay has a brilliant collection of essays. She's a brilliant writer, obviously.
Yeah.
But this book, Bad Feminist, what did it mean to you? Like, do you consider yourself a feminist?
I do. I mean, we can get into the politics of the word feminist versus womanist. I mean,
right.
But at the core of it, I do, and I always have, and it's been as a woman, that kind of work has been liberating for me. I mean, it's all part of the cause. It's all part of dismantling structural violence for women, for people of color, for poor people, for people with different, I mean, the list goes on. So for me, it's that feminist work, the work of Roxane Gay and so many others, is critical to our liberation.
Right. And we had Mickey Kendall here a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And again, what I find is many Black women sort of navigating feminism, but also saying, look, it's going to look different for us. And in the case of Roxane Gay, for those of you should read this wonderful book. It's called Bad Feminist. And she talks about the way that she's a feminist who engages in certain practices that may seem at odds with feminist ideology. But again, it's a complicated way of thinking about what feminism is. And it's always going to look different for Black women because the experiences are so different. One of the things you do in this book, which I think, even if it was not your intent, is you kind of make another intervention into this conversation about Black feminism by saying, look, when we appear in this way, these are the particular types of circumstances we're forced to wrestle with. You talked about early in the book, the glass ceiling and how it ain't really glass, right?
Right.
And that there's much more stubborn and sturdy materials other than glass that prevent Black women in general, but particularly Black women from ascending in the medical field. So your book, for me, is a wonderful piece of cultural criticism, a wonderful piece of social analysis, and a beautiful, really soul-stirring memoir. I'm so glad that you wrote it, and I'm so glad that you hung out with us today.
Me too. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure was mine.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Coffee and Books. If you want to purchase any of the books discussed on today's episode, go to UncleBobbies.com. That's Uncle BOBBIES.com.